Okay, here we are, Matthew Russell Lee, Inner City Press, here, midday, Monday, June 9th, day 19 of the U.S. versus Sean Combs trial, and it's all Jane. Jane has continued on direct. This will be the last day, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey, but what a day it's been. Basically, it started, there were a series of communications in October 2023 where she was like, it's over, you've made me do these terrible things, you keep threatening me in the house. And he did then threaten her about the house, saying, if you don't perform for me, I won't perform for you. But then the Cassie lawsuit hit, and they've just been playing this audio tape of when Jane called Diddy, or Diddy called Jane, and they're communicating about the lawsuit. And he says, I need you now. You know what I'm saying? Are you recording me? And she says she wasn't recording you, but there is a recording. So the question is, where did this recording come from? There was a stipulation read about a seized cell phone.
She sat in silence, her voice steady but low, until the moment she said it. I felt like a sex worker, in my own relationship. The courtroom didn't move. No one whispered. No one coughed. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. This wasn't just another celebrity scandal. This was something far more disturbing. The woman on the stand, using the name Jane, wasn't filing a lawsuit. She wasn't selling a story. She was telling it, piece by piece, as the truth spilled out under oath. And that truth? It shattered the carefully curated image of Sean Diddy Combs, not with rumors, but with the kind of testimony that makes a jury lean in and a public turn away in disbelief. Hotel nights, bruises beneath makeup, coercion disguised as love, and a quiet, well-funded loyalty that lasted long after the bruises faded. But it didn't stop there. Because when federal agents raided his homes, when the surveillance video of Cassie broke, the internet, and when the headlines finally caught up to the whispers, Jane was still inside that world. And she had a story to tell. This is that story. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But when Jane described what her life had become, the weight of her words landed like a punch. It was a shameful, dark secret, she said, staring straight ahead. I never told anyone, not even my closest friends. For 3 years, Jane lived in a reality most people can't even imagine. Behind the private jets, the luxury hotel rooms, and the designer parties, there was another world. One made of manipulation, silence, and control. She wasn't just Sean Combs' girlfriend. According to her, she was his on-call party girl, and she said the cost wasn't just emotional. She testified that during those years she was unemployed, financially dependent on Combs, and buried under debt, all while being expected to participate in what he called hotel nights. Nights that, to her, felt less like a relationship and more like a transaction she couldn't escape. It wasn't until Cassie Ventura's lawsuit went public that Jane says something inside her snapped. I just reacted like, I can't believe I'm reading my own story. That lawsuit wasn't about her, but it might as well have been. The patterns were too familiar. The language, too close. Jane realized that what she had lived through wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern. And that realization? It brought her to the witness stand. But her testimony was only getting started. And what came next revealed just how deep the darkness really went. The phrase sounded harmless enough, hotel nights. But in court, when Jane explained what those nights actually were, the jury's expressions shifted. What began as confusion quickly turned to unease. He called them parties, she said, but they never felt like celebrations. According to Jane, these weren't just wild nights in luxury suites. They were orchestrated events arranged by Combs, involving drugs, camera phones, and paid entertainers. Men brought in specifically to perform with Jane, while Combs watched. Sometimes he joined. Sometimes he recorded. Sometimes, Jane said, she dissociated just to get through it, and it wasn't always voluntary. She testified that on more than one occasion, she told him she didn't want to do it, that she was tired, that she felt degraded. But each time, she said, The answer came wrapped in guilt and control. "I didn't want to feel obligated," she texted him. "But I was scared to lose the roof over my head." He was still paying her rent, still covering her legal fees, still calling, texting, sending voice notes telling her how much he needed her. Not for love, but for loyalty. And yet, the nights continued. Sometimes in New York, other times in Miami. Always in a hotel room or behind the closed doors of a gated mansion. She said she tried to set boundaries, tried to stop, but Combs would respond with persistence dressed up as affection. "Just one more night," he'd promise. "Then we'll have that proper trip." But that night always came. And so did the entertainers. What disturbed Jane most wasn't just what happened during those nights. It was how normal it had become. "At some point," she testified, "I stopped resisting. I just accepted it. And when one of those men later threatened to leak a sex tape, that's when things escalated from disturbing to dangerous." By the time Jane described the bruises, the courtroom was silent again. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom, but the kind that comes when the room is holding its breath. She wasn't just talking about emotional trauma anymore. She was talking about nights where arguments turned violent, about being pushed, dragged, kicked, about makeup applied not for beauty, but to hide the aftermath. "He kicked open the door," she said, "then the bathroom door, then the closet. Each time she tried to lock herself away, he broke through. She ran. He caught her. She screamed into pillows, not walls, because she didn't want the neighbors to hear. She said she hid outside, by a wall for 2 hours after one fight, barefoot, waiting in the dark, and when he found her, he kicked me in the thigh, picked me up in a chokehold, choked me." On another night, she punched him first. A moment of desperation, she admitted. He responded with fists to her face, to her temple, to her eye. The bruises, she said, were the size of golf balls. The jury saw video footage taken the next day. Jane still calling him bestie, her face partially concealed in makeup and shadows. But the injuries were still visible. They watched. Another video she recorded, her own documentation of what she didn't want to admit out loud. "Why did you keep seeing him?" the prosecutor asked. Jane's answer was quiet. "Because I missed him." The confusion, the guilt, the trauma, it was all tangled together. Jane testified that even after the worst nights, she'd reach back out, sometimes out of habit, sometimes because she was worried, and sometimes because he told her he'd change. But what happened after those fights didn't just hurt. It crossed a line Jane hadn't talked about before. Because that's when the entertainers would arrive. The day the Cassie video dropped, the headlines exploded. Grainy surveillance footage. A hallway? Sean "Diddy" Combs violently assaulting Cassie Ventura in 2016. There was no voiceover, no context, just undeniable images. And suddenly, the silence that had followed Combs for years was cracking. But behind the scenes, in a Miami mansion surrounded by walls and security, Jane was there, watching it all unfold from inside. "He didn't say much at first," she testified. "He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just huddled with his team." According to Jane, Combs' sons, assistants, and inner circle formed a quiet circle around him, planning what the world would see next. Not a defense. Not a denial. A statement. Jane said she was pulled into that circle too. She saw the drafts, gave him feedback, helped shape the apology video that was later posted online. The one where Combs admitted it happened, but called it a dark moment from his past. He wanted it to feel sincere, Jane recalled on the stand. But what stood out wasn't just the video. It was the emotional distance. There was no panic, she said. No breakdown. It was just handled. The very next day, she flew back to Los Angeles. No blowout fight, no heart-to-heart, just a quiet exit. And a few weeks later, she was back with him again. When we were together, Jane testified, it was the same routine. Having sex, entertainers. Nothing changed. Even as the world began to question the persona, even as federal agents closed in, Jane said the life behind those walls continued undisturbed. But the illusion of control was starting to slip. Because what Jane revealed next showed how tightly money, silence, and fear were all tied together. After the bruises faded, after the police raids, and even after the Cassie video shattered Diddy's public image, one thing stayed the same. The money kept flowing. Jane told the court that even after everything, Sean Combs continued paying her rent, continued paying her lawyer, continued reaching out like nothing had changed. And when things did get violent, there was always cash to clean it up. He sent me between $10,000 to $12,000, she testified. Said it was to cover the entertainer and the damage to my home. Damage as in 4 doors busted down during a night that ended with Jane running barefoot into the dark, hiding by a wall to avoid another blow. She sent the cash in a bag wrapped in paper placed in an Uber. She took a photo of the license plate, just in case. But the money wasn't just for silence. It was also power, control, a subtle reminder of who held the strings. When one of the entertainers, a man named Sly, later threatened to release a sex tape recorded during one of those hotel nights, Jane panicked. He told me it was 35 minutes long. He wanted $10,000. Combs hadn't filmed it on his own phone. He used Sly's. A calculated move? Or a misstep? Either way, Jane called Combs. His legal team jumped in. Threats turned into legal warnings. The tape never surfaced. But the message was clear. These nights weren't just personal. They were recorded, cataloged, possibly kept as leverage. And Jane wasn't the only one at risk. In texts, Combs allegedly threatened to send explicit footage to the father of Jane's child, a move she described as sex-tortion. She later confronted his chief of staff, who allegedly agreed to hide the phones the tapes were on. Jane had once called it love. But by now, even she admitted what it had become. I became the side chick and the sex worker in my own relationship. But, even after all of it, one thing kept pulling her back. And what she said next made the courtroom pause once again. By this point, the jury had heard it all. The abuse, the coercion, the control. And yet Jane's voice didn't crack when she said it. I still talked to him. I still missed him. Even after the surveillance video. Even after being kicked, choked, and dragged. Even after the threats, the tapes, and the cash-stuffed Ubers. She kept answering his messages. She went to see him again. And when asked how she feels about him now, Jane didn't say she hated him. She didn't say she wanted revenge. She said, I just pray for his continued healing. I pray for peace for him. In that moment it became clear. This wasn't just a story about violence or power. It was about emotional captivity. The kind that doesn't leave visible marks, but leaves someone questioning their own reality. The prosecution played a phone call recorded months earlier. Jane's voice was emotional, cracking with exhaustion. Who's there for me? She asked Combs. When I close my eyes and I have these fucked up things in my head? On the same call, Combs didn't argue. He didn't push back. He simply said, I need you to be there for me. And Jane said she understood what that really meant. Keep quiet. Stay close. Don't flip. You ain't got to worry about nothing else, he told her. To the jury, that meant one thing: hush money. Continued support. In exchange for continued silence. But to Jane, it meant something harder to explain, because when control comes wrapped in intimacy and abuse disguises itself as love, walking away doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like abandonment. And yet, she did walk away. But not before one final moment would change everything, and turn this case from deeply personal to legally devastating. Jane never planned to testify. She never planned to go public. She wasn't seeking headlines, and she wasn't filing a lawsuit. In fact, she told the court, "I haven't filed anything, and I don't plan to." But something changed in November 2023. That was when Cassie Ventura's federal lawsuit against Sean Combs hit the news. Within hours, Jane said she was trembling, sick, triggered. And when she read the details of Cassie's claims, she said it felt like staring into a mirror. "I felt like I was reading my own sexual trauma." 3 pages of the lawsuit, she told the court, were nearly identical to her own experiences. The language, the scenarios, even the birthdays. Jane testified that on her birthday, just like Cassie claimed, Combs had forced men on me. She texted him in a panic. "The sick part is, you knew this was coming," she wrote. "And you gaslit me. Made me feel crazy for the sex trauma I was developing." Combs didn't answer right away. 2 days passed. Then he sent a simple reply. "Call me on this phone. Important." That moment, that text, was the beginning of the end. Jane agreed to testify. She sat before a grand jury. She told them everything: the hotel nights, the threats, the love bombing, the abuse, and most importantly, the coercion. Because in the eyes of the law, what she described wasn't just toxic, it was textbook multiple. Legal experts say Jane's testimony could be pivotal in the sex trafficking charge against Combs. She told the court that she often felt obligated to perform because he was paying her rent, that she feared losing her home, that she repeatedly said no, and was pressured until no didn't matter. The prosecutor connected the dots. When sex is traded under threat, or under financial pressure, or with emotional manipulation, that's not consent. That's exploitation. Jane's voice didn't shake as she read the messages aloud. "I don't want to be used to perform and fulfill your fantasies," she had written to Combs. "I don't want to feel obligated anymore." And yet, despite all of it, the pain, the fear, the silence, Jane made one thing painfully clear. "I'm not even the same person anymore." Sean "Diddy" Combs was never just a music mogul. To the world, he was a kingmaker, a visionary, a man who could bend culture to his will and throw a party that stretched across the globe. He was charm, power, untouchable. But in that courtroom, stripped of the lights, the cameras, the aura, something else began to take shape. Not in outbursts, not in viral clips, in quiet testimony, in slow, steady words, in text messages that read like cries for help and phone calls that revealed something colder than cruelty: control. Jane didn't tell her story with rage. She told it with weight, the kind that builds up when you carry something for too long, and as she spoke, the myth began to fracture. Not with scandal, but with truth. "I became the side chick, the sex worker, in my own relationship. I told him I didn't want to. He said, 'Is this coercion?'" Her story wasn't perfect. It was complicated, messy, human. And maybe that's what made it so hard to dismiss. Because this wasn't just about Diddy. It was about the way power bends reality, the way money smooths over bruises, the way love, or what's sold as love, becomes the perfect weapon. And perhaps the most chilling part, even after all of it, she still prayed for his peace. That's not weakness. That's what survival can look like. As the trial continues, one thing is certain. Whatever happens next, the illusion has already cracked. And somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the courtroom doors, a woman who once felt silenced is speaking. Not for fame, not for money, but because the truth finally has a seat at the table. And this time, it's not going away.